Welcome back to the Change in the Perception of Sales. The podcast is designed to change the way people perceive the sales industry. Sales shouldn't be this dirty word, and together with the help of you and our guests, we're looking to add value and share insights to the sales community, and together make sales a career of choice. On today's episode, we are joined by Sarah Brazier, co-founder of Dimo. If you work in tech sales, Sarah Brazier is probably a name you're familiar with, or have at least seen pop up on your LinkedIn feeds before. However, a few weeks ago, one of Sarah's posts absolutely blew up, being seen by over 12 million people. But unfortunately, it wasn't for the right reasons. It was highlighting and sharing Sarah's recent experience of being discriminated against just for asking about an employer's maternity policy. And based on the reaction to the post, it's safe to say that Sarah definitely isn't alone. We talk in detail about exactly what happened, trying to really understand why this does occur, and we look forward at what the potential solutions could be. Not only all of that, we touch on Sarah's transition from the world of acting to becoming one of the top performing SDRs and AEs at Gong, how Sarah really would recommend approaching a cold call, and the launch of Dimo and what the future of the SDR role could look like. Hope you enjoy the episode. Welcome to this episode of the Change in the Perception of Sales podcast. And today I'm pleased to say we are joined by Sarah Brazier. Sarah, thank you very much for joining us on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me, Kyle. I'm excited to be here.
It's great to have you. And you're based in, well, where are you today? Because it sounds amazing. It looks great as well, actually, where you are. Very jealous.
Well, I'm based in New York and Brooklyn usually, but I'm visiting my parents down in South Carolina. So I'm in Beaufort, sitting on their back porch. And there are lots of birds chirping and creaturing. So there's also a military base nearby. Maybe we'll hear a jet fly overhead. We'll find out.
Jets. Hopefully we still keep to the birds and the creatures because they sound quite therapeutic. But to kick things off, Sarah, please, just for the listeners and people tuning in, just give a bit of an introduction and background into who you are and what it is that you do.
Yeah. So my name's Sarah Brazier. I'm the co-founder of a company called Dimo. Before that, I worked in tech sales, and I've been in sales for 7-ish years, I would say. I worked at Gong most recently for about 5 years, and that was very foundational to my sales experience. And I do some advising for seed and early stage startups. And we just talk about sales a lot. I talk about sales a lot. I'm a salesperson.
And talking about sales, that is exactly what we are going to do today as well. And a lot of the stuff there, your time at Gong and the kind of advisory roles that you have, definitely keen to tap into a little bit later on. But as we always like to start on this particular podcast, is all back to the beginning of how you actually were introduced into sales. Because for most people, the answer tends to be, I fell into the industry. But yeah, how were you first introduced to the wonderful world of sales, Sarah?
First introduced to sales, my dad worked in sales. He was in the military when I was a kid, and when he got out, he needed to find a job that he could transition into easily, and sales ended up being the place where he landed. I think a lot of military people in the United States end up going into sales after they serve their time, and a lot of that skill set transitions over really well. And then how I got into sales selling, actually. I was working as an actor in the San Francisco Bay Area, and it's hard to pay rent on an actor's salary. So I was working a bunch of part-time jobs, trying to scrape together health insurance, trying to scrape together rent, trying to feed myself. And I just thought there's got to be a better way. So I was working as a temp at a startup called Optimizely, and I got introduced to one of the heads of enablement there named Jim Jones, and he kind of opened up the world of tech sales to me, introduced me to his network, got me my first SDR job, which I was woefully bad at. And then eventually I got recruited and hired over at Gong. And then that sort of launched my success in sales. So that's how it started.
Brilliant. Love it. And yeah, we get a lot of people that go from acting actually into sales, probably for the reasons that you said. As amazing as acting is, it's really difficult, to really make it there. And as you said, pay the rent on maybe the uncertainty of it. But at what point did you go, actually, I'm going to make the move now from pursuing acting, going into sales itself?
Well, I read on a blog somewhere, someone talked about how they did sales while they were acting. And I thought, if I could just find a job where I could make myself really critical and central to a business and they would always want to keep me around, then if I could just prove my value to a business, then I could eventually continue to act. And it's like if you hit quota, if you do what you need to do, then you can do whatever you want. Um, and so that was my plan. And then there's so many things that cross over with sales and acting in terms of storytelling, in terms of understanding why people do what they do. A lot of your research as an actor is really around, why someone would make a choice one way or the other, how people make decisions, because you're telling a story. And so you're trying to tell it truthfully. And you do the same thing with your customers. You're trying to kind of psychologically profile them and understand what they want, why they want it, and how you can help them get there, and how you can frame your solution as the ultimate path to get to what they desire. So, if you can make that connection from theater to sales, it becomes a whole lot easier to transition over. Theater's competitive. You go into auditions all the time. You get told no more times than you get told yes. And it was really easy to step over. And then once I did, I kind of, you get adrenaline rushes when you start closing deals, or as an SDR, so sourcing meetings and sort of the tete-a-tete of being on a cold call and objection handling and, going back and forth and figuring out a way to kind of convince someone to take a meeting. That was really fun in my first couple months. It's still fun now, but especially when it's new, it's so fun to be figuring out this new skill and kind of mastering it. So when I got to Gong, I told myself I wasn't going to do anything in theater for a year, and I was just going to work really, really hard on getting a promotion to account executive, which I eventually did. And then COVID hit. And so there were no shows happening. There wasn't any theater to do. So I just kept selling. And then I still do, fun theatery things when I have a chance. But in the grand scheme of things, it's nice to have like a paycheck that's consistent.
I can completely get it. And you mentioned the adrenaline as well, being quite similar from acting into sales. And I always actually quite like to ask this question, more for just nostalgia, because I think every recruiter remembers their first placement. I feel like people in sales probably remember their first sale closed, the first meeting booked. So can you remember your first meeting booked or sale closed, and how did it make you feel?
I don't remember my first meeting booked. I remember the first couple months of ramping and moments of getting super close and, chatting with someone on LinkedIn and thinking, oh, I've got a chance, and getting my manager to come stand over my shoulder, and we're crafting our messaging together and trying to figure out how to, how do we sway this person? What do we say? And I mean, that was super critical to my learning and success. And then, I remember my first deal closing. It was my first month as an AE, and we got it in like right before I hit the 30-day mark. But it was great. It was exciting to close a deal. It was not the way that deal itself unfolded was so different than your typical sales cycle that it's kind of like, I remember that deal. It was really weird.
What was so different about it?
The structure of their business was a little bit funky. We were not fully at power. The buyer was just a character. You know how you sometimes get people that you're like, you are a trip to be around. I wonder what it's like when you're not in a sales cycle. It was just like, it was like situationally, it was kind of funky because the use case was not what I would typically, go for, but they wanted it and they bought it and they were good customers. So kind of justifying the business case, and then the back and forth at the end with the negotiation was a little bit different than what you would typically expect. Because we weren't at power, so we thought we were at power, but he sort of convinced us that he had this chief title officer, chief revenue officer, and you would think that he would own his own budget, but the CEO wanted to sign off on everything, and we ran this whole thing without really getting the CEO's buy-in. So there was just like a lot of playing catch up super fast and wanting to get the deal in. So I don't know. It was just a funky deal. It was a funky deal.
Funky. I love that word, funky deal. I think they're the ones you remember the most sometimes, though it wasn't maybe
Yeah,
textbook or straightforward. And just on your the reason I asked this is because we're in the same world in terms of our people we sell to, being sales leaders. What was your experience like of selling to salespeople?
it's great because they are more understanding of what you're trying to do. So I would say like 80 to 90% of the time, sales leaders know exactly what you need in order to close a deal. So they're trying to, if they're bought in, they're trying to help you close. And especially in commercial sales where you're first cutting your teeth and learning, if you can come in and say, I'm still learning how to do this. They're not going to be offended. They're like, "Oh, great! I'll teach you how to close a deal." So there's a little bit of that where you can sit on the same side of the table as the customer and help them get what they needed, and also be learning from your customer as much as you're learning from your manager. And then obviously there are some sales leaders who are jerks. There's jerks in literally every profession, and everywhere you go, someone's going to be a jerk. And they're a little bit more challenging to sell to because they want you to sell exactly the way they think that people should sell, and so they'll be a little more judgy around it. But yeah, I think in that same vein, you end up really you learn a whole lot faster and you perfect the craft, or you get closer to perfecting the craft. I don't think you're ever perfect at sales, but you really figure out what it is that moves a deal forward. And people are radically transparent with you about it. So there's a lot less guesswork and trying to see if someone's, just trying not to hurt your feelings. They're a lot more honest about what you're
Yeah.
doing wrong or why they're not going to buy.
Yeah, get it. Agreed. Yeah, it's kind of two ends or two sides of the coin, but it's very interesting at times selling to salespeople. Feel like you're kind of under the magnifying glass a little bit more as well. Like feels like the expectation just have to be that little bit better, which I think is good because you always feel like you have to deliver and be on your game. Um, on your
But then
game
you
at
can call
Gong.
it out. You can call it out. You can just be like, so that I'm trying to understand what the revenue impact of this is to your business. You tell your reps that they have to do it. You just told me this is really important to your sales cycle. So can you help me understand? Like you can just call out, this is what you told me you want your reps to do. I'm going to try to do it with you. Can you help me understand? And they're like, yeah, totally. So that it makes it easier because
Yeah,
you are speaking the same language. They understand like how you're trying to write the music. They understand the methodology that you're trying to implement.
yeah, agreed. Completely agree. And coming on to the kind of your time then at Gong, performed really well. Top performer, President's Club, all over LinkedIn. I remember seeing content over the years many, many times on my feed every single day. What do you think it was that you were doing specifically as an SDR to begin with that was kind of making you consistently one of the top performers?
Um, I think I think it's just being consistent. So I think a lot of things I just got lucky. Working at Gong, especially as a pandemic happened, the need for revenue intelligence became so much more critical. And Gong had there was definitely a battle in the early days when I started at Gong in 2019. Chorus was very popular. Gong was very popular. There were a couple other like smaller companies that still were, they were competitive, and so like how we differentiated became really important. And Gong had great leadership, a great marketing team, and they were really able to make themselves the front runner. Um, and so that that was lucky for me to be part of that team and to be part of the team that was building that up. Um, and then I think like things that made me successful. I think number one, for anyone to be successful in sales, you just have to be consistent and you have to do the boring things every single day. You have to make your cold calls every day. You have to send your cold emails every day. Um, you have to stick to your schedule. You have to, look at your numbers once a week and go, what do I need to do in order to back plan from my annual number? What do I need to do monthly? Therefore, what do I need to do weekly in order to make sure that I'm hitting my goals? And so all of that I think is really important. And anyone can do that, and as long as they have the willpower. And then I had a really good manager who um, was very much a coach as an SDR, and wanted to make sure that you really understood why you were saying the things you were saying, and what does this really mean at its core, what this customer is saying. And we would listen to a lot of calls and break them down and kind of try to understand the psychological profile of what this person wants and why they want it, and understand the business case and what is the revenue impact, and what would this mean for a company if they had an uplift here, or they weren't able to achieve this goal by this timeline, and really thinking through logically what that means, and having someone who will sit down and do that with you, not just tell you, but kind of like Socratic method your way through it. Like that, I think, was a big difference. And then when I became an account executive, the same thing. I had Matt Boehm was my first manager, and he was very patient and got on every call, and always, I probably had a manager on my call every call that I took for the first 3 months, and then every important call that I took for the next 6 to 9 months. So just a lot of people who would be patient with me and handhold, because you can be a really hard worker, and you can do all the things that you think you're supposed to do, but you can do them really poorly with no coaching, and you won't get the results that you want. So you need a little bit of both.
And I think you're being very humble at the beginning there as well, in terms of calling it luck and timing and everything else. But I guess I can come into it, but I'm sure a lot of it was just the work you were doing consistently every day. But on the manager piece, I think it's a fair point, because there are a lot of people listening to this that might have recently moved, or might be looking for a good manager, but don't necessarily know what to look for. And you mentioned the term coaching specifically then. But what should sales reps be looking for in a manager or a coach?
Yeah, so I think when you are doing your interview, you first want to understand, is this someone that I could get along with, and that I could have tough conversations with and easy conversations with. And it's no longer the employees market when it comes to finding a job opportunity, the way it was like during COVID. But I still think you have to have a lot of discretion, because if you're working for a jerk, you're just not gonna get the results that you want, and they're not gonna get the results out of you. So some questions that you can ask are things like, can you tell me about a time you had a rep on a PIP and they were able to successfully turn things around? What specifically did you do? How did you coach them? How do you typically coach reps? How do you communicate disappointment? How do you, celebrate your reps on a regular basis? What things do you do to coach regularly? What's your process for coaching? What's your process for deal management? And just get a sense for how they like to run their team. And you need to know, and you might not know, but you need to know, like, how much do you want to be micromanaged, and how much do you need to be micromanaged? How much assistance do you need? That changes as you evolve as a seller. You probably need a lot more assistance and a lot more questions asked, and hand holding at the front end. And then as you become more independent, what is it that you actually need from a manager? And instead of them, making sure that you've updated every Salesforce field, which you should be doing anyway, it's like, what roadblocks can they move out of your way to get you what you need? So if you need resources from the from the customer success team in order to bring them into a meeting, or if you need an executive to be aligning with another executive at the company that you're selling to, is your manager going to help support you in that? Are they going to be able to get you those things? And how do they do that? So, you are interviewing your hiring manager just as much as they are interviewing you. And I definitely think that the best sales relationships is where your manager is your true partner. You're like, it doesn't always happen. So you have to know, like, what are my limits? What kind of person can I work under in the worst circumstances and still be successful? And what's my ideal relationship? And have your criteria in front of you. But those are always really good questions to ask.
Yeah, I think those questions are really valuable and actionable. And you're right, it's a two-way relationship, and rightly so. You should be interviewing them as well, and even doing it in your current role. Actually, maybe thinking about those questions, not maybe directly asking them. What would be, again, not going through all of them, but I really like the PIP and turned it around. What are the things that people should be looking for in terms of the actual answers to these questions that would be a green flag, so to speak?
I mean, to me, can they really give you concrete examples of the exact steps that they took in order to be successful? They're doing the same thing for you in terms of understanding your sales process. What are the steps that you took with a customer? And so the vaguer they are, the more, you should be a little bit suspicious. And then you can ask to be introduced to that rep that they were able to turn around and interview them about their experience. So you should always be back channeling through the team to figure out what the culture is. You should be reading Glassdoor reviews and rep view reviews and getting a sense for those things. But yeah, I mean, like, I think the answer in and of itself depends on how you want to be managed, what is satisfactory for you. But I would be looking for like a clear process, for a clear example, for it to be recent. Um, and I would want to understand what happened to that rep in the time leading up to them being put on a PIP, what changed, and like what process they put in place to change things. Because that can also kind of tell you, is the company really quickly putting people on PIPs after like one bad month or one bad quarter, or like what is their philosophy around that? And that kind of tells you how they value people and how they value coaching, and what they expect out of you in terms of quota attainment, actually, because there's one number put in front of you, and then there are other numbers that they're really running their team by. Typically.
Good. So I think, to summarize that, you're basically looking for probably what they're looking for in how you answer your questions, and being concise, accurate, recent example, as you said. So I think that's really, really actionable advice. And just probably one or two more things on, I guess, your personal experience in sales and time at Gong. I know that you are, from what I've seen on LinkedIn and conversations we've had, you're a big advocate of using the phone and cold calling, as we all should be in sales, as SDRs and AEs even now as well. Probably more so now. The requirement for AEs to self-source is more than it was years ago. But what are kind of the actionable tips that you could share from your own sales experience that makes really strong and effective cold calls?
Yeah, I think the first thing is know who you're calling and why you're calling them. So this is happening less and less, but it still happens. Reps are given a list and they're just calling down a list of names and companies without really thinking about, is this a good fit? Why would they pick up the phone? Why would they take a meeting? And so your conversion rates will always be lower if you're calling down large lists that you haven't really vetted. So do some vetting beforehand. And then once you get somebody on the phone, sort of have a structure for how you want to have that conversation. So I typically use permission-based openers. Well, first I use have you been as my opening line. So it's like, hey, Kyle, it's Sarah calling from Demo. Have you been? And you say whatever you say. And then I say, hey, I know that nobody likes a cold call, especially on a Wednesday morning or Wednesday afternoon for you. But I can be super brief. Do you mind if I have a couple seconds to tell you the reason why I called? And then you can decide if you want to hang up on me or continue the conversation. And then you'll either say yeah or no. And if you say no, then maybe I will do some pivot, because if you say no because you're walking into a meeting, or you say no, just send me an email, I might say something like, yeah, no worries, I can shoot you over an email, but before I spend 30 minutes typing something up, does it make sense for me to tell you the reason why I'm reaching out? And then you can tell me if you even want me filling up your inbox with follow-ups. And then you'll probably be like, yeah, I don't really want your spam, so just tell me. Same thing with walking into a meeting. And then usually I can pitch then. And then if you still say no, then it's like, okay, I'll shoot you over a calendar invite. When are you going to be free this afternoon for 10 minutes for a quick chat, or, later this week? And then if the answer is yes, I can pitch. The pitch, typically you want to have something that is really clear about specifically why I'm reaching out to you, Kyle. And not only why am I specifically reaching out to you, but what is happening in your business that would make you care. So being a VP of sales is not enough. Um, being a VP of sales whose sales organization is doubling in size and is releasing a new product this quarter probably implies that you have two things going on. One, you are currently training your current employees to sell this new product, and you need them to be able to sell it effectively by a certain date in order to hit the revenue targets surrounding that product. Oftentimes, that can make or break a sales organization depending on why you're releasing it in the first place. And then the increase of headcount, you're probably thinking about how you're onboarding people, their time to productivity, and there are revenue numbers attached to those that headcount number. So if they aren't ramping fast enough, then that could again affect your overall annual number. So those two reasons are great to reach out to a VP of sales because those are actually top of mind. And then, from there you can pivot into pitching whatever sales tool you have that's going to help them ramp their sales reps higher or sell their new product faster, or anything else in between. But you need to be able to connect the dots between this event's happening, therefore you have this pain. And you can, the reason I'm reaching out is I could be totally off base, but these things are happening. So I assume ABC is going on in your business. Is that off the mark? And then you'll either say, yeah, that's totally top of mind for me. And then I can ask you some discovery questions around it. Or you can say, nope, not a problem. And I can say, that's great you have that handled. So I'm curious, what is top of mind? And then maybe you'll tell me and maybe you won't. But, that's sort of like the way that I'm navigating my calls.
Brilliant. Very, very granular and step by step there, Sarah.
Yeah.
So the first bit then, I'm keen to understand the thought process behind how have you been. I think a lot of it comes down to tonality, actually, and the way you delivered it. So I see it's quite divisive with people saying you should never ask how someone is, or actually you should include it. And yours is a bit of a variation in the how have you been. So what's kind of the logic and thought process behind including that at the beginning?
So Gong, when I worked at Gong, they ran a study to see what the most effective cold call opener was. And it was specifically, how have you been? Not how are you today? Not how's your weekend going? But it was just, how have you been? And they reran the numbers again a couple of years later, and it was still the number one line. And so until like someone shows me data or it stops working on the phone for me, I'm not going to stop doing it. And that's my thought process. I think one of the reasons why it works is it puts the person first. And it is, you, Kyle, how have you been? Not what are you doing today? Not, do you want to buy my software? Not, will you hear my pitch? I'm not asking you for anything. I'm just checking in on how you're doing. It's polite. Sure, we don't know each other. That's fine. Like, we can get to know each other. And then I think the other piece, the permission-based opener, gives you a sense of control of the conversation. I think too often sales reps come in and they feel like they're told you have to control the conversation. Therefore, they immediately go into their pitch, and it just is very off-putting. Whereas if you can come in and if you ask, then your like defenses are up at the beginning of a call because you're talking to a stranger, and they're going to come down a little bit if you say, sure, go ahead and pitch. And then if I have a strong enough reason for you to stay on the phone with me, hopefully I've piqued your curiosity by then, in which case you'll start chatting with me.
Yeah, interesting. I think it's almost like a bit of a pattern into how have you been, because when you get asked how are you, you don't really think about it. Everyone will have the same phrase or two words that they will use in response, regardless of how they actually are. They will probably say the same answer. Whereas how have you been? You almost stop for a second and think, how have I actually been? So it almost like it disrupts the usual pattern of cold call. So definitely interesting. The way that you said for overcoming in a meeting, yeah, I think that could work well as well. It's a big objection that we always get. I'm going into a meeting, but it's 19 minutes past 3. Who's got a meeting that starts at 19 minutes past 3? So I think that was interesting as well. The personalization piece then, what we see a lot is people just saying, hey, Sarah, I noticed you're a co-founder, or hey, I notice you're a VP of sales, and I think you're right. It's not really enough to cut through the noise. The question here is, what do you think the balance is between personalization and scale? 'Cause it's a question we get asked a lot. I think sales leaders asked a lot as well is, yeah, I want my reps to do more personalization, higher quality calls, but I worry they might not do the volume of calls that are needed. Well, what would you say in response to that?
Well, that means that you have a process problem before you even get on the phones. So before you start talking to people, you should be tiering your list of accounts. So whether you have a geographical territory or whatever, there is a set number of companies that you could possibly sell to at any given time. And the number of those companies that are actually buying is like 5%, and then there's maybe like another, it's like 8 something percent that's open to open to potentially buying or learning more. So you have a really small number of people that will ever be interested in your product when you actually call. The other rest of that total addressable market within your book is going to be, you're really just trying to educate them and drip, and maybe you'll get lucky and someone you didn't think would be interested will actually, be willing to get on the phone with you and start the process of a sales cycle. So you should tier your accounts. So you should go in and look at that book of accounts and say, who is the best customer for us? And you should have criteria. So it's like, do they look like our other customers? Do they hit these metrics and qualifications in terms of, does their tech stack integrate with what we need in order to work? Do they have the size sales team? That was always important for me at Gong. Do their sales cycles look like our other customers? Would they be actually on the phone with people, either on a Zoom or on a cold call? Those were all important. So like, what do their internal processes look like? What's their tech stack? And that was one set for me to, do criteria. And then the other piece was, is there anything going on in their business right now? Have they had leadership changes? Are they hiring salespeople? Have they had massive dip in their sales team? In which case they could need something like Gong. All of the triggers, the signals and triggers that would make them a good company. And so anyone who fits both the company profile and the triggers and signals is tier 1, because they should be in the market right now. And if they're not in the market, I have a really good opportunity to bring them in. And that's going to be really, really small. That's going to be, 5 to 10% of my book. And then my tier 2s are, they either have all of the right things going on in their business, but it's not going to be as chunky as a deal. Maybe there's something with their tech stack that's not quite right, or I'm just not quite sure. But there's, or they could be a smaller business, but they look mostly good, but not as good as that 5 to 10%. So those are tier 2. And then everybody else kind of falls into tier 3, unless they're unqualified, in which I'm going to not touch them at all and send it back to RevOps and say, this list is trash. Not really, but and so the people that you're doing the most personalized outreach to is only 5 to 10% of your book, right? It's just those companies that really do check the mark in terms of they're a perfect fit in terms of who we sell to, and they've got problems. And so you're going to spend more time researching them and more time having really personalized, tailored outreach. And that's the bulk of your prospecting is going to go there. And then you're going to spend the second part of your time focusing on tier 2s. And you can do industry level research, or you can do higher level research. So instead of going, hey, I read your 10K or I read your quarterly earnings report, all of these things are going on, this is why we should be having a conversation, where you've got a really developed business case. Instead, you're doing things like pulling from a list of who raised funding and why, or who just had a recent promotion or whatever. You can go into all of the basic reasons why someone would want to talk to you, and you can kind of clump them. So like, recent funding is good, leadership changes is good, offices opening is good. You can look at those things and you can find lists on the internet, because there's always a new list coming out. And then you can prospect off of that. Hey, you are on this list of top 50 companies in Texas that are doing this really great thing. I thought you might be interested in what we're doing because of blah. And so you're not at the very personal why Kyle should buy level, but you are at a company level, and you can usually evoke some interest. And then if you batch your cold calls based off of reasons why they should care, then you're like, okay, great. I'm calling on every single cybersecurity company, and there's new legislation coming out for cybersecurity this year. that would impact every single cybersecurity company ever. So I'm just going to use that as my pitch. Hey, have you heard about the recent legislation that's coming out? How are you thinking about, changing your sales process based off of this legislation? Oh, you haven't? Or, oh, you have something in place? Great. What are you doing? Let's talk about it. And then I'm not going on the individual level, but I've got this list and I can call down this list and this good reason that is timely. So that's kind of how I'm thinking about it. It's like you're doing super hyper personalized research for a very small amount. You're doing general industry specific or company specific research for your tier 2s, and then kind of tier 3s is like, you can I would put them in drip campaigns, honestly. Just educational.
The educational ones, I like it. I think that's really, really useful as well, because I think the batching your cold calls based on maybe the triggers or the reasons why you're reaching out to them. Because I think a lot of salespeople might go from one call to the next with a completely different pitch or reason for calling, and it's just difficult to get that momentum. Whereas if you organize and structure your day, and as you rightly said, if you're in that position where you were in about personalizing at scale, it's probably the bit before you get to that point that actually needs working on and sorting out your list and your process. So really valuable
Yeah.
stuff. Mentioned LinkedIn a couple of times, Sarah, in that you say very vocal on LinkedIn, share a lot of content, have done for years and years. And there was a particular important post that you shared a few weeks ago that, let's say, took off would be an understatement. I think it had 150,000 likes, 10,000 comments. You'll have the analytics, but I think millions of people, quite rightly so, will have seen it. So for those listening to this that have no idea what I'm talking about, if you wouldn't mind just sharing a bit about the post, but more importantly, your experience as well.
Yeah. So it's like 2.5, 3 weeks ago now. We launched our company Demo, and I just told the backstory of how I decided I was going to go all in on building out this business. So I left Gong in September, and I candidly just wanted to take a couple months off to figure out what's my next thing, and I wanted to be really specific about the company that I worked for. And so I spent some time kind of thinking about what industry do I want to sell to, what do I want to learn, and what kind of company, what size company do I want to work for. So I had a pretty specific list, and I turned down a couple opportunities because it didn't quite hit the criteria that I was looking for. And I finally did. I found a company that I was like, this is it. And I kind of prospected my way into it. I found like someone to give me some referral in. I met with their sales director. I texted their VP of sales who just got brought on board. And when they opened up positions, they were like, yeah, let's start the conversation. And I already talked to the hiring manager before then. And so anyway, I got through all of the rounds of interviewing. It took over a month, and they offered me a position. And in that period, after they'd offered me a position, a salary, we'd pretty much agreed to everything. I was just waiting for them to send a contract over. I told the hiring manager I had some questions around their benefits package. And he said, go talk to the recruiter. So I talked to the recruiter, and I did. And I asked about what their maternity leave policy was. And 2 days later, they rescinded the offer. And I don't know if that is why they rescinded the offer, but everything leading up to that, they told me I was the best candidate. They told me I was the best interviewer. I interviewed on a Friday, and they called me and offered me the job 15 minutes later and said if they could, they would get me in that Monday. They really wanted to work with me. They were like very, very excited about me until I asked about maternity leave. And it just so happens that I am pregnant. So it was like a major bummer. And I cried for 3 days, and that's what my post is about. But then I just thought, do I go back through this process and I try to find a different company and go through another? It's going to take me probably a month to really get into an interview cycle, knowing how the economy is right now in the job market in SaaS. And then by the time I actually could get an offer, number one, don't want this to happen to me again. And number two, is it really worth it? Is there something that I can do that that's not gonna be completely derailed by the fact that I happen to be pregnant. And so I was working on the side project demo with Troy Munson and Lucas Schwarzenberg, and I just thought, I'm just gonna do this, and we're just gonna make this company awesome, and I'm gonna spend all of my time working on this project instead of doing it for fun on the side and selling for somebody else. And yeah, and that's the post. That's the post in a nutshell. That's what happened. And yeah, it blew up. I checked right before this call, and it has 12 million impressions, which is like wild to me. And I still am getting messages in my inbox like every day. And when it first happened, I mean, I was getting like multiple messages every hour from, hundreds of women and men who have gone through similar experiences of discrimination, where a lot of women sharing their pregnancy stories about either getting let go right before their maternity leave kicked in, or right after they got back from maternity leave, or let go during maternity leave, men being let go because they brought up the fact that their wife was pregnant, or not getting, moving forward in the interview process. And then stories of like discrimination based off of age, based off of, a health condition that got brought up. But, you've always heard like, don't bring up the fact that you're pregnant in an interview, and it's illegal for someone to ask. And now I've lived it. Now I know why.
Well, first of all, Sarah, massive thanks for sharing. Congrats on the soon-to-be new edition. And I guess so sorry you went through that as well. And I've seen the post is still absolutely blowing off. And my first thought when I saw the post was, you've got a big brand. A lot of people know who you are and have performed incredibly well in your sales career. My immediate thought was, if this is happening to you, how many other people is this happening to on a regular basis? So you kind of alluded to it then with your inbox completely going off. But what are some of the stories that other people have been sharing about their experience with a similar thing?
Yeah, I've heard from women, same thing, getting really far in the or in the interview process and proactively bringing up their pregnancy and people disappearing. I've heard, stories about people. People sharing about being, 8 months pregnant, and there's a riff where suddenly performance becomes really important. Getting messages from women saying, hey, I shared with my boss that I was pregnant, and 2 weeks later, HR pulled me in because they were concerned about my performance when I had a perfect performance review. I've gotten that message a lot. And then them getting let go. I've had someone share that they went through a similar situation to me, and they ended up suing. And now that, that's public record now, and so they can't find a job and they're 8 months pregnant. And it happening a couple months ago. There's tons of examples, and I don't want to like share too much. And then, someone feels like I told their story for them. But I just think that, there's tons of data out there. If I was reading, I think it was Harvard Business Review, but just talking about the way that women, specifically mothers, are treated in the workplace if they have children, and the perceived value to an organization, and especially how it compares to how fathers are valued. And essentially, like, women are it's thought that the perception is that if a woman has a child, she's going to care more about the child than she does about her job. And people are far less likely to hire them. If they do hire them, they hire them below market value. And they tend to be scrutinized for things like, being late in the morning, or, showing up to a meeting a few minutes late, things that everybody does every once in a while because life happens. Whereas men who are fathers they get a boost in perception. And so they're thought of as providers. They're going to stay longer term. They're going to be more diligent. They're going to work really hard. If they show up late, they actually get like a 6% boost in perception because they're such good fathers and they're so dedicated. Whereas a woman with children who shows up late is more likely to be put on a performance plan faster than a man who has children or a woman who doesn't. Things like that. So there's clearly there's a sociological way that we perceive mothers. And I've got a message from a woman saying, your story is literally the reason why I don't have kids right now, because I just changed my job. She recently gotten married. She's changed her job and she wants to have a certain period of job security before she has kids. And the Wall Street Journal, I think it was the Wall Street Journal, just did an article recently, like the world population is decreasing. Like we're not replacing ourselves, especially in Western countries. But it's happening globally, and there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. But to me, one of the reasons is women are essentially, if you want to be respected in the workplace, or if you want to be respected socially, women who are stay-at-home moms they often are not treated with the same respect as women who work, and it's very hard economically, the way that the world works right now, for you not to have a dual income home with kids. If you are lucky enough to be able to do that, you're quite fortunate. But you lose so much if you do have kids. And so I think women are like, what do I want to sacrifice? And they're waiting longer and longer. And so we're having a reduction in population. I think it's interesting because the economy it's not going to hurt right now, but in 20 to 30 years, if we're not replacing ourselves, then who's going to pay Social Security? And there's going to be a bunch of old people in nursing homes. Who's going to take care of them? Because we literally won't have the population to do those jobs if we're not. Because it's like, you need to be having like 2.2 children or 2 children per couple in order to replace yourself. But the number in the United States is like 0.89 or something like that. So we're just like not. I could be wrong, but I think that's what I looked at. So like that's an issue. And so immigration doesn't solve all of that because it's a world problem. It's not just the United States. It's not just the UK. It's not just Western European countries. It's like globally happening. It's very interesting. And I think how we treat women who are mothers and how we treat pregnant women has an impact on this greater economic issue that we're going to have. And the whole reason why you wouldn't hire a pregnant person is because you think that they're going to economically hurt your company. But the reality is pregnancy is short term and you can work through pretty much your entire pregnancy unless you have major complications, which most women don't have. It does happen, but it's not, people get cancer and they still work. People break their legs, people have back surgery, people get hit by cars. And we don't go, oh, there's a risk you're going to get hit by a car, so I can't hire you because you live in a high risk zone. But for some reason, we perceive pregnancy as this massive disability and motherhood as a massive disability where we don't want to hire them. And they are a protected class and it is illegal, but it's very hard to prove. It's like when I talked to the lawyer, he said it's not a 0% chance, but I don't think you're getting out of the single digits to win this case.
Wow. But which is sad. It's sad that is the reality of the situation. And again, as soon as I saw your post, I thought there'll be so many people that this has happened to. And we've spoken about this previously before the podcast, but I think it's important to understand the reason why. You touched on it then, maybe the economic impact of maybe hiring someone that will need to take time off work. But why does this happen so regularly?
So I think it happens for the previously stated reasons of perception. So we just have these inherent biases against pregnant women, you know, like even like the perception that pregnant women are like super emotional and like not able to get their shit together and stuff like that. Like I've been pretty fine. I feel good about me. I don't think I've sounded crazy in this conversation yet. Um, I do sometimes have to take naps, but you know, I take them when it's appropriate. And everybody's pregnancy is different too. So yeah, I think we just have a lot of perceptions around that. I think companies don't can get away with it candidly, and I think it's different in different countries. So, like in the United States, we don't have like a federal maternity leave policy, and so it's on a state by state basis, different states, and some of it's like up to the company. So, I live in New York. They actually have one of the most progressive policies, which basically says a company has to offer you maternity leave if you've worked there for a minimum of 6 months. Which is wild because there are women who could be pregnant and might not know that they're pregnant and get hired at a company, and then they won't even be able to take off whatever that company offers. They could only take temporary disability, so they only get a weeks away to heal up and then go back to work. And then what is their baby going to do? Their 2-month or 1-month-old baby. Where are they going to hang out? So, yeah, so like, but like in Canada, you get 12 months off, and like, but that's government subsidized, and everybody gets it, both men and women. So like, part of the problem is that women need maternity leave because there's literally you physically had this traumatic event that happened to your body. You have to take time. You literally have to let your body heal up without getting explicit. Let alone like you have a baby you need to take care of, and you know, the majority of women breastfeed. Like you can't. It's really good for your baby. There's like not really a reason why you wouldn't unless you physically cannot. And so like all those things are really important to do. And in the long run is better for the economy, and in the long run is better for people. But if there's this perception that because you have a baby and you have to take time off, but it would be the same if a man has back surgery. It's like, yeah, he has to take time off. Like his back is broken. He had to have back surgery. He can't come back to work right away. He's got stuff he needs to do. So anyway, TLDR, I think particularly in the United States, there's no federal maternity leave or like parental leave policy. Men typically take less time off. Some companies, my mom said that when my dad was working, if you took like more, like you'd take 2 weeks off and then you'd be back at work. So the fact that there's the perception that men don't need to take time off, which is also stupid, in my opinion. And there's nothing subsidized by the government, even though we do have a world population problem. I guess interesting if you read about like what Japan and South Korea are doing just to try to get people to have babies. Like I think it's South Korea is like if you're a woman and you have a baby before you're the age of 30, you don't have to pay taxes anymore. Like
wow.
they just they're like, okay, great. Like that's so important. Like they're like really trying to exactly. Yeah, that's what I should have done. I should have moved to South Korea. But except I'm over 30, so I don't qualify. But like there's so many things that like globally there's so much need to replace the population, but it's not being incentivized. And I think companies are very like, what's our bottom line? What's our immediate return? And then there's like sociological perceptions. Might have to trim that down because that was just a lot of me tangenting.
No, we do not trim anything down on this podcast, that's for sure. And I think you mentioned that some of the incentives or initiatives that the likes of Japan and South Korea are doing. We had a look at some of the maternity policies around the world as well, and I was absolutely shocked to see that the US was rock bottom, like literally rock bottom when it comes to this, which is absolutely crazy to think. But it was no surprise that Scandinavian countries that are often considered the happiest populations in the world. I think Estonia in particular was really, really good on their maternity policy. And what was interesting, a lot of these allowed the days to be shared from the mother and the father and both parents as well, if they wish to do so. So they can make a conscious choice as a couple as to who returns to work, who doesn't. And I think it's at least 80% pay that you get. So there's a lot, I think, that the likes of the US and the UK, which is better than the US, is still nowhere near good enough. I think there's a lot that we can learn from other countries. But in your opinion, I don't think we're going to solve this on this podcast, which is a shame. So I would love to.
No.
But what do you think is the solution, or certainly steps that are needed to take in the right direction?
So I think in this situation, this is like to me, there's like a legislative question. There are tons of companies that do the right thing, and there are tons of companies that have great maternity and paternity leave policies. But there's always the fear that there's this thing on paper that says you can take 6 months off. But if you do take that 6 months off, that's somehow going to go against you, depending on who your manager is. And it's all, it's all company based. So if the policy is 6 months off, but everybody's coming back at 4 and you do take the 6, is that going to somehow be a ding against you? I know that is a thought that runs in the back of people's minds. Especially when you're in like such a performance-based role like sales, where it's cutthroat. It's like, how much are you producing? Did you produce what you need to produce this month, this week, this year? So there's not, aside from retaining employees, which I think should be motivating for a lot of companies, and retaining talent, there's not a lot of reason for them to offer solid maternity or paternity or parental leave policies. So they'll typically do whatever the lowest common denominator is. And that's why you have, you get max 2 months off with your baby, maybe 3 months off. The best maternity leave policy I've seen is 6 months. And I don't know anywhere in the United States that offers more than 6. My downstairs neighbor got 4. And then a lot of women, what they'll do is to increase it, they'll also take temporary disability on top of that, which the company doesn't pay anything for. And you can do that if you're an American listener. You can take temporary disability in addition to your maternity leave. So because there's not huge motivating factors, and because this type of discrimination is some of the hardest to prove, basically, unless you have it in writing, we're not giving you this job because you're pregnant, or we're not giving you this job because you have kids, or you have something like that about why you got fired, it's very hard to outright win a case. Typically what will happen is a company will settle with you out of court, but the lawyer that I talked to said that those could take 2 or 3 years. And then you have to go through all this discovery, you have to dredge up all these things. And if you're, preparing your mind and your body to have a child and raise them, do you really want to spend your time, your free time, thinking about suing someone? And so a lot of women and men, a lot of families choose not to follow or pursue any kind of legal action. So instead, I think what has to happen is that there needs to be some kind of federal maternity or paternity leave policies, that it needs to be equal. Because, the idea that every family is going to choose to have dad go back to work isn't realistic. That's not how 2024 and the world works. And that's not really how the world has worked ever, but that's how things have been set up, especially in the United States. So, like you said, being able to share your parental leave between the couple, making it something that's government subsidized, or that there are specific legislation in place. But if we think that companies are going to somehow change what they're doing because it makes them feel good, I don't think any CFO is going to just approve people feeling happy as a legitimate business reason to offer some kind of additional leave. You have to really run the numbers. And I bet there are numbers to support better leave policies, but there's like data around carbon emissions and how they're bad for the environment. And, some people say that climate change isn't real. So like you can have numbers and people will be like, fake news.
You can have the numbers, but people need to be motivated to want to make change, or to want to see action. So
yeah, but motivated, whether it's going to be like more money in their pocket, or motivated like you'll go to jail.
But I do think the bit you've shared around the legislative change, that has to be the solution because, again, I said this when we spoke previously, I unequivocally disagree and it's absolutely wrong, but I can understand maybe small to medium businesses feeling the pressure, not wanting to hire someone that they're going to have to pay for 6 months. It's wrong, but if there was subsidies in place or things in
It
place,
made it
the
easier
work,
for them to make that to offer, then yeah.
yeah. But like, it's wrong and it absolutely needs to change. I think a lot of it is based on really old school traditional principles. I think in the UK, the maternity cover, it ends up being around £136 a week after a certain time period, which is what, probably at $110 per week, which that's probably on the basis that the old school traditional way is the man is the main breadwinner. You know, they bring the most money into the household. That's not the case now. Although there's still inequality in how women and men are paid. Actually, there's a lot of cases now where women are the main breadwinners, and if they're getting that really small percentage, you know, it's really not a good policy. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
more women are graduating, at least in the United States, more women are graduating from university than men are. So you're going to see, white collar jobs are being filled up by more and more women. Typically, they pay more, not always. So you're going to see a difference. I also think like my husband is Dutch, and so in the Netherlands, it's very common to not work a full time job, to work a subset of hours. So when his mom had kids, she worked 2.5 days a week, and her husband worked 4. And so they had enough income that worked. There's lots of great government subsidies in place, and her parents babysat, or I think his parents babysat one week, and the neighbor babies one day a week. The neighbor babysat the other, and half day that she worked, her husband was home. So, they're only paying the neighbor for one day of daycare instead of paying every day. And she was a teacher, so she's working teacher hours, so she could come home early. But there'd always be someone home with the kids, and or there'd be, and there'd always be a family member for most of the time, really nearby. But in the United States, like I don't know of any, and I could be wrong, so someone can message me on LinkedIn and prove me wrong. But I don't know of any jobs like that you could work where you could be taking you could work like a white collar job that you could really take part time. You could like teaching, even unless you're a substitute teacher, you usually are doing full time, and you get your summers off, but kind of not really. I was a teacher for a year, so it's kind of not really. I don't really get my summer off. And then like nursing is the other one where you might work like 3 days a week, but you're working 12-hour shifts in the United States. That's what my sister does. So, but like other than that, there's not a ton of opportunities, ton of jobs that you could really have more flexible work. And I just think in like the age of AI and the age of you can like literally work from anywhere, the digital nomad, we could probably have like more flex hours. Make it a little bit easier. So I feel like that is something that I feel like businesses could offer.
I think there's a real opportunity though for some businesses to almost be the trailblazer and say, this is what we're doing, this is our policy, we're booking the trend. Not only would it be the right thing to do, it'd be a great talent attraction tool as well. But looks like we're very much still waiting. But there's one positive thing that's come out of this situation, which has been that you're focusing your time, energy, and attention into Demo, which you've recently founded. So yeah, share with us a little bit more around Demo and what it is.
Yeah. It's a platform where you can go watch sales demos without having to talk to salespeople. So, I think if you talk to your typical B2B buyer, first of all, 80% of the sales cycle takes place without a salesperson in the room. And they like it that way. And as it's like 45% of decision makers in businesses are millennials, that's only going to go up. They like to do their research, be on their own, and they want to talk to salespeople when they're ready. So the main thing, and I think this slows down a lot of sales cycles, having been an account executive, is that people will come in and they just want to see a demo. They don't want to do a discovery call. And then they'll let you know once they've seen the demo if they really want to pursue a conversation. And that's happening more and more frequently, but businesses aren't able to meet that demand. because their sales cycles aren't built that way. So we've built this platform where, as a B2B buyer or someone who's just curious, you can go watch SaaS demos. And then if you're interested, you can click a button and pursue a conversation with sales. And if you're not, then now you know, and you can start the conversation when you're actually ready. And I didn't think that it was going to take off the way that it did, but we've had, like hundreds of thousands of visitors to the website. We've had like over 500 companies at this point. It's been like 2.5 weeks sign up to have their demo on the website. Right now we're like currently triaging and figuring out, because we started off with just go-to-market tech, so sales software, customer success. Now we're figuring out like, what do we want to open this up to? But there's a lot of companies that see the need because they want to talk to qualified buyers. They want to help their buyers buy. They want to be able to be seen. And as like Google Ads is becoming like less and less lucrative, or the cost per lead is going up. So it's harder for companies to get in front of people or to even be seen. And it's like, who has the biggest SEO budget? This is sort of like a more diplomatic way for you to come in and be able to see anything that's in the space that could solve your problem and, truly make a decision that's right for you. And companies can really have conversations with buyers who are ready to buy.
Brilliant. And I've got to ask, I assume it might be a play on the word demo, but it's a little dinosaur, is it? Where did the name Demo actually come from?
Troy, my co-founder, he came up with it. Yeah, it's literally a play on the word demo. And it's so funny when Troy says demo, he says demo. Like he doesn't call demos anymore. He calls demos. So they're just demos. But yeah, and then I don't know how he came up with it. Yeah, I mean, I think he thought demo, dino, dinosaur, and that's how we have our pink little dinosaur, who's super cute. But that's all him. That's him just being a good marketer. He's a salesperson, but he's a marketer.
Cool. I love a little dinosaur anyway. Loved it. And you've kind of mentioned then, and you're absolutely right, buyers now don't, as sad as it is, don't want to speak to salespeople as much throughout the process now. And there's like an anecdote I always talk about where people nowadays, or the new generation, 10 years ago, people receive a call, you just pick up the phone and you find out who it was. What people do now is they receive a call, they're completely available to pick up the phone, but what they'll do instead is they'll Google the number to see who it is, do some research before deciding whether to call them back or get back in touch. So it is so true. But what do you see then if buyers aren't wanting to speak to sales as much anymore? How do you see the SDR role in sales orgs evolving over the next few years?
Yeah, I think if you follow Kyle Coleman on LinkedIn, he talks a lot about this, and I think I'm in agreement with a lot of the stuff that he says. I think there will still be need for SDRs, but there will have to be more training that goes into bringing on an SDR. Traditionally, it's like you pull someone who just graduated from college, who doesn't know what they want to do, and you hand them a list of names and numbers and tell them to dial down a list, and they, burn through a massive lead list, piss a lot of people off, and then, hopefully figure things out. And that's not going to work anymore because you cannot burn through your leads the way you used to. So what I think is going to happen is that you're going to get someone who's kind of like a little bit rev ops, a little bit marketing ops, a little bit SDR. And they're going to be using these different AI machines that are being built, the copies AIs, the clays, and they're going to be using these systems to help build an outbound strategy. And then they're going to kind of be, controlling that. So they're still going to make cold calls. I still think the phone is going to be important because it is so human. It is far more human than receiving an email. But they're going to be more strategic about who they call and when they call them. They're still going to send emails, but the emails are going to be at least in part AI generated and, part human edited. And you're going to see leaner SDR organizations. And then I think commercial sales, probably a lot of that will end up being automated through AI, which has already sort of been happening. You'll see a lot of product-led growth. Companies can sign up and pay for something on their credit card, and it's not until the size of the opportunity gets so big that they need to bring a consultant in who is a salesperson. A consultant is a salesperson. But then they become an expert in sort of how do we deploy this to the best of our ability? How can we really solve your problems? And so you'll continue to see enterprise sellers and mid-market sellers too, but they'll really be getting to do what I think is the most fun part of sales, which is helping, orchestrate and navigate challenges that a business is having and truly be a solutions-oriented salesperson. And there'll still be the level of competition because there's always more than one solution to a problem. But there'll be a lot more of that going on. And companies will need to have good demos and good marketing and a good forward face to companies, to their potential customers, so that the customer is interested in the first place.
So salespeople, not to worry. Your jobs are safe. You just need to be better, basically.
Yeah,
pretty much, which is not a bad thing.
Not a bad thing at all. I think the reason why, and I think this is the reason why you started this podcast, is that salespeople have a bad rap because they don't have a Tanner Robinson who's coaching them, or they are, they've got a perception of what they should be, and so they are doing a lot of things that are counterintuitive to building a strong relationship and solving problems. They become I forward. I need to make, I need you to take this meeting. I need to hit a certain number instead of you centered, which is what do you need? How can I help you? Are you having this problem? Have you thought about this? And I think, the reps who do that really well, and they still need, still should be hard workers and challenge their customers. And it's not like they have to roll over and be the customer's always right mentality. But, at the end of the day, I think if you're focused on solving problems and finding solutions to pain, you're going to be better. You're going to have a better sales career period.
Well, Sarah, we've dissected how you go about cold calls. We've talked about discrimination in the workplace and why it's wrong and needs to change. And we normally conclude with changing the perception of sales, which I think that was a really natural and fitting way to finish today. So thank you very much for joining us, Sarah. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was great chatting with you, Kyle.
Likewise.